Okay, so welcome back to Mind Matter CogSci Talks, where we kind of explore the fascinating world of cognitive science. So today I'm excited to welcome Angel, who is an information science and cognitive science student currently at Cornell. And his work sits at the intersection of human cognition and technology, spanning from, like developmental psychology, human-computer interaction, artificial intelligence, and virtual reality. And his research includes studying infant cognitive development, which is really cool, designing AI-powered tools and creative immersive VR environments to kind of better understand parent and infant interaction. And beyond research, he's passionate about building technology that enhances how people learn, interact, and experience the world. So, Angel, thank you so much for joining me today. And it's a pleasure to have you. So, before we kind of dive deeper into, like your research and everything, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What first got you interested in, cognitive science and information science? And was there like a specific class or like moment or some project that maybe you did in high school that made you kind of realize that this is what you wanted to study?
Yeah, of course. Well, first, thank you for, having me on to talk about cognitive science and research. I think it's really, really cool that you're doing this. So yeah, I'm currently about to be a senior at Cornell University studying in information science and cognitive science. I actually did enter Cornell wanting to study history. So a lot of high school for me was trying to understand what I wanted to do. And at the end of it, I thought I wanted to do history. And so I applied to a lot of my universities thinking I wanted to do history. In high school, I did some like, I was at like a STEM kind of school. So I did some like engineering projects, of course, to like AP Bio and like AP Chem and stuff like that. And so I was but I didn't take AP Psych 'cause that just wasn't available to me. But I was really cultured in like maths and sciences, basically. At the same time, I sort of wanted to do history, so I did history going into college. And that was fine for my first semester, but then I realized it wasn't. It, I feel like I wasn't surrounding myself with the people I wanted to surround myself with. And so at the end of my freshman year, I was sort of like shopping around for majors like, what do I want to do actually? And so I just pulled up the major website at my university and found both cognitive science and information science. Now that same semester, I guess that would have been my first semester of sophomore year. I took a class with a professor under Michael H. Goldstein. And it was basically like an developmental psychology class. And it was interesting how he was framing the baby, basically. So I mean, the whole class was like how the babies grow and how they like learn things, and also like the mechanisms behind like how they learn and become babies to then become fully fledged humans, basically. And so I was taking that class along with a Python class, because I thought I wanted to do information science. I sort of landed down on that first. But then when I took a Python class alongside that dev sci class, I thought there was an interesting sort of connection there. And so maybe it was that sort of connection that sort of like brought upon me wanting to do cognitive science and information science together. Um, but yeah, I think that's where it started. It was like sort of like this like combination of like I wanted to be in something that felt really novel, really interesting, but also where I could sort of learn a lot about a lot of different things. And I thought cognitive science was sort of like that. You know, you take some psych classes, you take some CS classes, but you also take some like econ classes as well, and at least at my university. And so I like that about cognitive science, and I love the ability to create things with information science. And so it just seemed like a natural combination for me at the time.
I see. So when you got into like your sophomore year, did you realize that, history wasn't the best for you or like how was like freshman year? Like, did you enjoy it a lot or did you like realize you had more of a passion for like computer science and like, like information and cognitive science?
Yeah, so I wanted to go into history because I thought I liked, like politics and like stories from the past, basically, which I do. I'm not saying I don't like that. I realized it was more so like a hobby rather than an actual fully fledged career. Um, I felt like I was still missing something when I was taking those history classes, and I think I was missing some sort of analysis that just wasn't really present in my history classes. Of course, there's like, historical analysis, and there is analysis that like lives within history, but it just felt like something I was missing. I was felt like I was missing something. And so when I took those classes, for instance, and like in info sci and CogSci, I got more of that. I got more of that like interesting connection between two different worlds that made me feel really interested. And I sort of started begin seeing uh, the mind as a computer and both the computer as a mind, like sort of like the interchangeably creating that metaphor in my head, um, which I think is sort of like where it began. Like that metaphor came in my head after taking those classes simultaneously, um, and that's yeah, I guess that's just where it started pretty much.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Okay, so I guess now we can kind of talk about your research. So you've worked in a couple of research labs at Cornell, and I guess in your opinion, what has been the most exciting project that you've worked on or just been a part of or just, maybe like viewed?
Yeah, so I currently work on a project at the baby lab at Cornell actually. So this was under the same professor who taught that psych class. And it's called the baby lab, which is the beginning years of or the behavior analysis of beginning years lab is the full name. And at the lab I have a project called Virtual Baby. Um, and it's a really interesting project because it intersects both the technology and my ability to like want to like create things hands on, and also a lot of like theoretical ideas from psychology. And so the idea of the research is that we created a virtual reality simulation where we have parents and non-parents put on a virtual reality headset and sort of play out this scenario where, for instance, they're on the side of the road, their car gets broken down, and they they're driving down the road, and the car breaks down, so they pull over to the side of the road, and sort of like instinctively, they sort of like get out and start waving down cars, right? But they have an infant, a baby, in their back seat who's starting to get more fussy. And so the idea is that in this sort of game scenario, their baby is out next to the road next to them, and at the same time, the participant is being tasked with waving down passing cars and like estimating the speeds of cars as they pass by. So here we're trying to study we're trying to study caregiving and how caregiving comes about. Basically, we understand caregiving as very like categorical, whether it's like we sort of like label parents as like authoritative, for instance, or permissive. These are just like names that we give parents basically by like self-report by survey. And that's how we sort of understand caregiving. But the field doesn't really do a lot much they don't do as much research on the parents as they do the babies. And so the research I'm doing is a lot more focused towards the parents. And we're trying to like understand caregiving on a more like moment to moment basis. So rather than like making it categorical, we're understanding parenting as things are actually happening in real time, which makes sense because caregiving is that's like sort of what it is. It's very quick reactions, and you have to make moment to moment decisions. um you can't always rely on like some like parenting philosophy basically. Like if there's a threat of a car moving that your baby is walking towards to, that's sort of like the scenario playing out, right? So like that threat is supposed to present some sort of like embodied behavior. um, at least that's the idea. And like we found like that like a lot of like parents and non-parents, both of them created these really like distinct like strategies basically when trying to take care of this like virtual baby. Um, and we have reason to believe that those strategies emerged simply because of the presence of the baby. So we also like had a control of like a robot, for instance, as like a robot toy walking around at like the same way the baby was. Um, but we have evidence suggesting that it was the presence of the infant that sort of created these strategies that sort of leads us to believe that like caregiving is not perceptual, but it's happening. It's like more of an like embodied action, I guess. That's happening from like a moment to moment basis. Now this research is really interesting, mainly because I feel like it intersected these like my two majors really, really well, which I didn't expect to. I didn't join the lab the baby lab like necessarily thinking I was gonna do this, but I ended up doing it. And so for me, it's been really like satisfying. It's like really satisfying basically to sort of find that connection. And I think it's sort of perfect for like what a cognitive science would do. So yeah.
Yeah. So it's like you're kind of testing, like looking at like the decision making of like these parents or just like non-parents in general to see what they would do, like with the factor of a baby. So I guess like with that, is there like anything like when you guys do like analyses, like is there anything that surprised you with the results or were they kind of like what you expected?
I'm in the camp that what what came out was sort of expected. The field finds it surprising, I guess. But like when we have a baby running around in front of you about to like run and like hit a car, right? It's reasonable to believe that like parents or like adults in general would take care of that baby, right? And like they would like do something, they would pick it up, they would stand in front of it, something like that. That's reasonable to believe. And although we do like the field like understands that, it's like we call it like people humans are alloparental, meaning that if likewise if you see if a baby is not yours basically, but you see a baby out on the street or even like in a grocery store, you're gonna like say hi to that baby. Like you're gonna like look at that baby a special way and probably make a face at it. You know what I mean? Like most people do that because there's a sense of like adults being alloparental in a sense that like uh we don't just have one caregiver. There's like a lot of different people that care for us as babies. And so in that sense, it's like not surprising. Okay, like yeah, it makes sense. Like adults, as in parents and non-parents, are gonna sort of behave similarly. I think what was interesting was the specific strategies that emerged. So whether like for instance, some people decided to just like hold the baby in their hands. Other people decided to like stand behind them. And so like obviously standing behind them gives like a bigger like vantage point, right? So they can see the baby and the road in front of them. Um, and some people like didn't do either of those and they stood between the road and the baby, right? And those like strategies didn't they weren't really emerging because of any specific like there was no like the presence of the baby helped so those strategies emerged, but what specific strategy emerged didn't really matter. As in, like, it was just like random based on like different like attentional biases, right? And like we all have a different attentional biases just based on like how we were raised or whatever it be. And so I think it was interesting for me that those strategies were sort of random in a sense. Like it was just based on other factors that was not dependent on the baby or not basically. So it's the fact that it was like other factors that emerged those kinds of strategies. That was really interesting to me.
Sounds really cool. So I guess I'd like to shift gears a little and talk about AI since you know it's such a popular topic nowadays and so important. So since your work kind of bridges, you know, both human cognition and like artificial intelligence, and I saw that you're also developing like an AI powered educational like tool. So how does like since you study cognitive science, how does understanding like human cognition change the way that like you're building AI? And like what advantage do you think it gives you over like other people who kind of like only study computer science or like only study artificial intelligence?
Yeah, yeah, this is one thing I really love about cognitive science is the fact that, like I said, I feel like the first metaphor that came to like my mind when I was thinking like if I want to do this or not was understanding the human brain as a computer and like vice versa. I know from my understanding, a lot of like machine learning, uh, like work that was done in like the 70s, 80s, and 90s and beforehand as well, did try to capture the human brain, like try to like model the human brain basically, right? At the same time, I also know it's really hard to like replicate a human brain in machine learning or AI, like that kind of like higher order processing is in a way sort of impossible to replicate, right? But I think it's really interesting that we are like that was like at least in the beginning of like machine learning research, I believe. We are like that was our goal, I guess, essentially, to try to model the human brain. So like when it comes to human cognition, I like entirely believe it's like the like backbone of AI. I mean, I think it was the backbone of machine learning, right? And machine learning has become this like AI movement. But the way we think of things, I think, outside of like the black box that AI has become, um, really does model, I think, how what AI is now. So like when it comes to AI, I think human cognition is really important.
It's like, do you ever think AI will truly think like a human if, like we train it good enough? Or do you think it's just like it'll never be a human? Maybe in like, I don't know, 100 years. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I don't. I mean, I don't know. I guess I'm not an expert on this, but I definitely feel like no. I mean, I think every technology has its limits, right? And in order for AI to like fully replicate the human brain, I think would be a really, really big ask. And I think we have a lot of nuances to ourselves, that I think AI could never truly replicate. There's a lot of like randomness about like how we live, about nature, about life. And so I don't think AI could 100% ever do it. It'd be interesting to see, obviously, but I don't think so, no.
So I guess another question is, have you worked with like large language models like Claude? Since Claude Code is so popular, I know like when I did hackathons recently, like everyone's using Claude Code. So what are your thoughts on Claude or like other, LLMs?
Yeah, I actually I only use Claude. I don't really use ChatGPT or Gemini or anything. I pretty consistently use Claude. Truthfully, I think I started using it because there was like a free subscription or like a really like discounted subscription um as like a college student. But since then, I found it a lot better than other LLMs. I think the responses it gives me feels a lot more natural, I guess, in a way. I think when I use ChatGPT, for instance, I have this feeling that it's like more apparent that I'm talking to a large language model. But for some reason, something about how like Claude inputs or outputs rather, it feels more human in a sense. Um, and I also feel like I've also used it to like, do like some vibe coding, and I feel like the results from Claude are just like a little bit better. And that's more so just like observational experience. I've observed is a little bit better, I feel. But I don't, there might be biases there. I'm not sure, but yeah.
Like there's a lot of ethical concerns over AI, especially since, like they're scared that it will like not take over the world, but like take a lot of like the cognitive abilities, like a lot of students. And there was actually like a really similar issue when they were kind of like developing calculators because they were scared that like it would take away like the, I don't know, addition and multiplication like that these kids should use, but then it ended up discovering more. So in your opinion, like what are your thoughts on that? Like, do you think AI is harmful or do you think it will kind of like, let us learn more and develop more? Because I know that they're like limiting like GPT, I don't know, like 5 or 6. I'm not really sure which one the new one is because they're kind of scared. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I that's something I've been really thinking about a lot as well, mainly because I feel like, as like a senior in college, it's like getting to the point where like you gotta, like find a job and so on. And so I know a lot of people who are working with AI and like want to go into the field like as a job, like working with AI basically, like an AI engineer or whatever it be. Um, and on one hand, I do see it as valuable as like a technology, right? But on the other hand, I do very much see how it could be sort of like this gray area, at least, morally and maybe ethically. Um, I know there's a lot of confusion about like water usage, right? There's different sort of facts about that. Um, but I do know that like data centers, for instance, are like really damaging to like the environments around them. Um, so on one hand, I could see it being useful. On the other hand, I sort of find it a little, worrisome. But I guess it just depends.
So I guess now diving more into like your skills, like it seems like you have a lot of impressive technical skills from, like Python to Blender to AI prompt engineering. So, which technical skills, in your opinion, have been the most valuable to your journey? And I guess just to high school students or maybe to like anyone in general, do you think students should start learning today?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can speak about like every single like those three you mentioned, I guess. I mean, I think Python is obviously like a classic programming language to learn, the most user-friendly one, right, to learn. I think Python definitely has a lot of usability, not just in like creating your own little projects or in like if you want to go into CS, but I think it's also just really useful across the board. So I think Python is definitely a good language to learn, and one you can also learn by yourself. I know I'm positive, high schoolers are fully capable of learning that by themselves. Um, when it comes to like AI prompt engineering, like obviously again, like with AI being more a thing now, and like vibe coding is actually much more relevant now. There's a class at Cornell that's like literally called coding, where like I presumably students will have just like vibe code and like make projects. But it's becoming like more like it's legit in a sense. Um, and so that's I imagine is going to be a useful skill to have. To a degree, I guess it's a degree of which AI grows, but at the same time, right now it's growing very very fast, obviously. So I think AI prompt engineering is definitely a skill to learn. Blender, I think, is a really fun skill to learn. So Blender is like 3D modeling, right? So it's from when I first started learning it, it was a huge learning curve. And it typically is, from my understanding, with Blender, but it was really fun to learn. I think one thing that I've learned from like majoring in cognitive science and information science is that it's really fun to like not know like a software or like a program or like how to do something and just sort of like figure it out as you go, sort of. And I think a lot of research is like that. Like you don't necessarily know what you're going to do or like how you're going to do it, but you're in a way sort of figuring it out as you go, in a way at least. Um, and Blender is what I use for the virtual baby project to help create the virtual baby. And that was just really fun just to learn. In terms of like being valuable, out of those three, I think I would say Python is still very valuable. Of those three, um, I think even when you're like vibe coding, like knowing what the actual code is saying is still very valuable, I think. And I think most people agree with that. And so obviously learning how to code, learning Python is really valuable. Um, After that, I would say probably AI prompt engineering and Blender is definitely something if you learn now can be really creatively fun. Um, People make really cool like kinds of like environments using Blender. So that could be like it's sort of like a fun thing to learn in terms of like it being valuable. It's I would say lower on the scale, but still very valuable. You can use C sharp in Blender to help create like scripts as well. And so that's also very, very valuable in like in of itself. But obviously, I would say C sharp is I think a little maybe harder to learn than Python. Um, so yeah.
Yeah. So I guess finally for any high schoolers or rising college students or, underclassmen for college, who are maybe listening and who are interested in also studying cognitive science and maybe do like research that is similar to yours, what advice would you give them? Like if they're just getting started or they're kind of deciding what they want to study and this is just like an interest point.
Yeah, I would say one thing I wish I did truthfully was consider what kind of like not just what kind of major I wanted to have, but also what kind of like job I wanted to have. Granted, you know, I guess it just depends. Like you want to know what kind of life you want to live to a degree at least. Like for instance, I know a lot of people, as an example, in information science, tend to go into like UX or product development, right? Um, or another example is if you're into finance, some people go into like consulting, which is really popular. Um, but the like work-life balance you have differs, right? And so one thing I wish I knew was like understanding what kind of life I want to live, at least to a degree, at least a little bit more. Um, Cognitive science is a really fun and interesting major to go into. Again, just because I think you're able to do so much and really you can do anything sort of, and you can sort of like pivot and like market it as like doing cognitive science, to a degree again. But I would really suggest you just sort of like sit down and consider like what do you actually value in terms of at least a picture of the life you want to live, and also your passions, and sort of like just being open to doing different things as well.
I know that like cognitive science is like it brings together like so many subjects. So I guess for students who are maybe like interested in, like some computer science, some biology, like decision making, or like psychology, like I think maybe like to study in college, don't I feel like you would have access to a lot of courses. So yeah. Yeah. So well that kind of brings us to the end of today's episode of Mind Matters CogSci Talks. So Angel, thank you so much for taking the time to share your experiences and insights with us today. And it was fascinating to hear about your journey, your research in cognitive science and AI, especially the baby project or the baby lab, and how you're using technology to better understand the way people think, learn, and interact with the world. So I'm sure our listeners learned a lot, and thank you to everyone for tuning into this episode. So thank you so much.
Thank you.